Hi, and welcome to round two of and To Be Astronomer talks about a geocentrist movie, which I think it's a geocentrist movie so far, anyhow. Right, let's delve into part two.
If the principle is wrong, it could mean that everything we think we know about our universe is wrong.
How so? Galaxies would still form, stars would still form, planets would still be in orbit around stars, black holes would still be there. What would really change if the Copernican principle was true? Wrong, I'm sorry. Well, what would really change if it was wrong? A bit of philosophy, all right. But from a astronomical point of view, I'm not sure if much would change at all. But I haven't heard all of the arguments, so let's keep on going.
All of us are born with an innate need. In fact, it's hardwired into us to answer the question, who are we? Where did we come from? What does it all mean?
Was there a beginning? And if there was a beginning, was there a creator?
Cosmology used to be a very flaky subject, somewhere out there between philosophy and metaphysics.
In the early days, cosmology was really very much a matter of almost speculating about the universe without the data.
There weren't any empirical proofs for what they were finding. There were theories.
Cosmology.
Oh boy. I will not talk about the cosmology overview that they are offering here because it's mostly a historical recap of what has happened, and you should probably read up on that yourself. It's not something I haven't looked at it. I hope it's genuine. I hope it's honest. I'd like to just mention this brief bit here when the theologian mentioned that it's just theory. Is that tells me very much that he is not a scientist and that he has little interest in science. Within science, we often name things differently from the meaning they have outside of science, right? For example, you can have in science, when you want to describe something, the first thing you do is you make up stuff. You make a guess, an educated guess at times, but a guess nonetheless. And when the guess is done, you test it, right? And if a few of the tests have kind of withstood your guess, it becomes a hypothesis. If it fits the most basic of observational data, it's a hypothesis, right? Okay, for most of the times it stays at a hypothesis for a substantial amount of time, and then in the end, if your hypothesis becomes bigger, it encompasses a mechanism behind it. If it makes predictions, that is extremely important. If it makes predictions, it becomes a theory. This is the highest something can become in science, a theory. This sounds contradictory, kind of, if you're not used to the scientific terminology, but a theory is really something extremely high. And for example, Einstein's theory of relativity is not just a theory, and gravity is not just a theory. When people say it's just a theory, that tells me that they do not understand the most basic of science terminology, really. So that's something to look out for in the future. Also, if you wonder, by the way, what's a law? Laws are part of theories usually. For example, there's the law of Newtonian gravitation, right? That's a law. That a law is something that until we understood that it doesn't apply always, kind of always applies, or at least has a very well set limit in which it applies. For Newtonian gravity, that would be classical mechanics. Nothing is moving either extremely fast, is not extremely small, and not extremely massive, beyond the mass of galaxies we're talking about, right? Or like at least beyond the mass of a planet. If you have two bodies like, I don't know, the moon and the Earth, the law of gravitation that Newton came up with is absolutely sufficient to describe this system for almost all of its applications. Of course, if you get extremely finicky with your measurements, you will need general relativity. But apart from that, that's a law. So you have hypothesis, which is just a guess that has withstood a few basic observations. And if it becomes all-encompassing, it becomes a theory when you have predictions, when you have a mechanism behind it, and things like that. Theories are very, very big usually. And if things are just, observed to be true that are usually a bit smaller, those are laws then. Alright, I will skip the cosmology overview as I said, and I will start right here.
The Copernican principle is theological dynamite.
Also, I think it's funny that they have a physicist
The Copernican
who talks about theology, whatever. Also in the background there, I recognize those. The first line is actually, I believe that's Einstein's tensor equations for gravitation. The second line is I believe what they said to him there is write something on the board that looks like physics. So what he did is in the first line he wrote the tensor equations of general relativity. In the second line, the D that you can see that is kind of crossed through, that's a Dirac notation. That's something from particle physics, and the gammas you see there are, no, the phi's, I'm sorry, the phi's you see there are actually wave functions. And the second thing here, this in the last line, this F mu nu squared that you can see, that's an expression that is used in electromagnetic field theory. So none of these have really anything to do with with geocentrism. They just said put something scientific on the board. I find that to be funny. It has nothing to do with the video. I'm sorry. You will hear comments from me like that a few times.
principle is theological dynamite.
It did, in a way, all start with Copernicus, because Copernicus, we started off with the geocentric view, and Copernicus showed that that is wrong, that actually it's the sun is the center of the universe, as it seemed then. The Earth goes around the sun. So then we had the heliocentric view.
Copernicus told us that we're not the center of the universe. We're certainly not the center of the solar system. The sun doesn't go around the Earth goes around the sun.
That's the Copernican principle, that if we are not really special, then this gigantic universe of ours doesn't care about us. We are nothing, absolute nothing.
I don't like the way Michio is putting it here. The universe doesn't care either way, because the universe doesn't have the property of caring. So I kind of dislike the way he's putting it. If he says that we are nothing, when we're clearly there, so we're not nothing. And I think life is something special, actually. Special in the way that we haven't detected it otherwise. Not special in the sense that because that some laws don't apply to us. So I kind of don't. I'm sorry, that was my WhatsApp right there. I apologize. So I don't like the way he's framing it here. The Copernican principle, I believe I explained it in video 1, just says that Earth is not a special place that is exempt from any of the laws that we came up with, and any of the theories might as well apply on Earth. That's essentially the Copernican principle.
Concepts of cosmology, this is called the cosmological principle. So the point is that we might think we're at the center of the universe because everything should look pretty symmetric as we look around us, around the sky, but actually any other observer would see the same thing.
It's the basis of the standard cosmologies, and it's taken for granted by almost everybody in cosmology.
When Copernicus first came along and said, hey, we humans are not so special and everything centers around us, a lot of people viewed this Copernican principle as something bad.
Like Copernican revolution.
I'd like to say, when a lot of fuss is made in this movie about the Copernican principle, but it's not as important as they make it out to be. Really, most cosmologists, at least the few courses I have had on cosmology, have not even mentioned the Copernican principle once, apart from, we called it the cosmological principle. It was mentioned precisely once, because it's like, it happened very early in the history of astronomy. And I believe that's the way why we mentioned it. It doesn't really change all too much about the galaxies that we observe, so, you know.
Revolution is the revolution of the mobility of the Earth. Copernicus.
Also, something that that just comes to my mind now. A lot of these observations were made with satellites, which most of the people over on the server that maybe were looking at this video. Hi, if you're looking at this video, hello. A lot of these things were made with satellites, and you don't believe in satellites really. The pictures of the cosmic microwave background were made with Kobe, Planck, and what's the third one? The first one was Kobe. The last one was Planck. WMAP, yes, WMAP. That's what its name was. So those were all satellites. Just putting it out there.
The Copernican principle leads to ultimately the idea that there is no God.
That we.
Oh boy, taking massive assumptions there, aren't we? The theological implications of the cosmological principle, or like the Copernican principle, are essentially just non-existent, I believe. I don't saying that this follows that there is no God just from the Copernican principle is like saying, I don't know, because it's way too big of a jump, is what I'm trying to say. I think it's offensively a large leap that he's taking here, but you know.
We are nothing compared to the splendorous universe of ours.
I think it was actually one of the greatest things that ever happened to us. We had this arrogance, and we got it knocked out of us. And we realized that actually we're not the center of everything, so we can't just say, oh, I'm not going to look at what the world looks like because I have a book here or my authority told me this is how it is. I don't need to do observations. And instead say, hey, it doesn't all center around us. We humans have to be humble. We have to look and ask Mother Nature, how do you work?
Something very nice what he actually said there is that we have to look, that the thing that he got very right here, I apologize, is that we can't just open a book and say, well, it says it in the book, because there will be inductive reasoning. Science is never inductive. Science is deductive, right? If you have the difference between reading something inductive is like, okay, I have a single example of things. For example, I have a book. Doesn't need to be a holy book, just any book. Let's take a book I have lying around here, The Lord of the Rings, right? And somewhere in there they describe how hobbits look like. And now I could say hobbits exist because my book says so. That's inductive reasoning. I only have one case, essentially, one not even a case, one thing that says that it is like that, and I accept it. That is inductive reasoning. This leads to multiple problems. Imagine if a person is coming out of the room and they have blonde hair and are female, and now you could say, well, everyone coming out of this room clearly is female and blonde. The other approach, the scientific approach, is deductive, in which you let's say it's a big room, it's an office space, something, and we guess that there are like 200 people in there, and we wait for the first 100 to come out, and now we make statistics about, let's say, because I mentioned it earlier, the gender and the hair color, and now we make statistics, and we say we predict the next person to come out of there will not be blonde and female, but will rather be, let's say, have brown hair and will be male, because that's the statistically most likely thing that we expect. That is science. That is deductive reasoning. You look at things, all the things you can look at, and deduce from them what will the next thing look like. This is a fundamental philosophical difference between those two. And what the Copernican principle did on this kind of level, on this more philosophical level, really, but it wasn't really Copernicus. There were other people. Galileo actually was very important in the philosophy of science, and there was several people that came up with the philosophy of science and how you question things, right? And they agreed that deductive reasoning is the only way with which we can come to anything that's close to the truth, really. So just thought I'd mention that. Also, science can't prove, it can only disprove. That has also something to do with deduction, right? But let's continue. Also, there's a globe Earth, by the way. Just putting it out there.
Not all were persuaded by Copernicus, however. The greatest astronomer of the time, Tycho Brahe, developed a new geocentric model. The Earth occupies the center, the planets orbit the Sun, and the Sun orbits the Earth.
Tycho Brahe, who is a great unsung hero of this, because he did an immense number of observations, very accurate ones, very precise for a long period of time.
Well,
I think it's funny that they say that he's an unsung hero. He's very much not unsung, actually. I learned about him in school, like when I was 16 or something like that. I learned about him at university twice, so he's by no means unsung. However, Tycho Brahe was someone who made extremely precise observations with his eyes only. He had very, very good eyes. However, that's essentially it. He made almost exclusively observations. He had very little idea about the underlying mechanics and things behind it. He also showed no real interest to explain it. He was merely an observer, so to speak. Also, I'd like to mention before the video is almost over, he was also a bit insane. He challenged people to duels and lost part of his nose twice, actually, which he got replaced by, I believe it was a bronze nose. He also paid a dwarf because he believed that dwarfs can look into the future. Now, this is not to discredit whatever is coming here right now. I just thought it would be interesting because, you know, I like stories. So, alright, thank you for watching the second part of this, I guess, series, and feel free to comment. I'd enjoy a like, and let's wait until part 3, I guess.